So first, who am I? My name is Maël. I used to work for Facebook for the past 2.5 years as part of the JavaScript Foundation team. And as part of my job there, I had to maintain the JavaScript infrastructure used by all our engineers. And as part of this, I came to contribute to the open source project Yawn that got created a year earlier. And as time passed, I started to contribute more and more. And here I am today talking to you about Yawn and more particularly the V2. So how did Yawn get created in the first place? It happened when 3 companies, so there was Google, Facebook, and Expo, who figured that the existing ecosystem didn't exactly meet their need in terms of stability, performance, and user experience in general, and they decided to try something different. A different solution with different architectural choices, different trade-offs that would still be compatible with the ecosystem that already existed. So that's how Yawn got created, and we tried to conserve this philosophy through all the features that we added during the years. Speaking of features, before talking about what will Yawn add to the table in 2019, we must first go quickly about what it already contributed, and more importantly, what are the things that it did right. By knowing what we did right, we can try to replicate it in the V2 and not lose it in the transition. So this is an open question, by the way. I would very much like to hear about your stories about what you think Yawn did right so that we can make something based on not only our opinions as maintainer, but also based on what our users think. So I will stay around after the talk, and please come to share your story with me. So something very important in my mind in Yawn is strictness. We want JavaScript project to be really stable, and we are ready to go the extra mile to try to achieve this goal. So one thing that we did is to work to remove unsafe patterns from the equation. You might have heard about how plug and play can avoid your packages from relying on hoisting and ensuring that it will work on production as it works on development. We also made the log files to ensure that no 2 developers could ever use different versions of a single package. To cut implicit dependencies, we even tried to remove the network. Speaking of network, this is one thing in particular that worked really well. At Facebook, we didn't even notice when the NPM registry was down. In fact, we usually learned it through Twitter because people were pinging us. The offline mirror is one of our less known features because you need to enable it through the configuration in order to use it. But that's one of the most powerful ones we have. So I encourage you to check it out after the talk. And if you don't, it will soon become a default in Yawn too, so you won't be able to miss it. Going back to the things we did right, workspaces are also pretty high in the list. So if you don't know them very well, workspaces are a feature in Yawn that allows you to split your application, your monolithic application, into various sub-projects that can operate independently. Each one has its own list of dependencies, meaning that you get a better overview of which part of your project is using which package. That also gives you an incentive to try to decouple your application into sub-projects that can work independently, which is better for testing in particular. So they initially came from the Learner project and were adopted by major actors like Babel or Jest. And now they have become a core feature of the Yawn experience. We want to make it really easy and so that you don't have to think twice about using them. As such, we will be doubling down our efforts to make them first-class citizens, as you will soon see. Finally, the last core feature that we should mention in my mind is the overall user experience. It doesn't seem much, but it's actually a big reason why our users say that they use Yawn. The small things, like the run keyword not being needed or the merge conflicts being automatically fixed. I know that huge features are often shiny and make for great announcement, but at the same time, those small things are the first clue that any new user will get in how polished is a project. So that's very important to get right. Additionally, those little features are the thing that we run every day. So that's doubly important. So now we have to talk about the big elephant in the room. Why are we even talking about a new major Yawn release? After all, you're already using Yawn 1 and it works pretty well for you. So we first try to figure out what is missing in the current Yawn now and figure out why we are going to fix it. So Yawn got created in 2016. Since then, a lot of things happened. For one, we released a lot of major features. Workspaces in 2017, plug and play in 2018, and we are going to bring zip loading in 2019. So those are huge features that change a lot the workflow of the development. And we needed to refresh our architecture so that we could stay up to date with all those new concepts that didn't even existed when Yawn got created. Additionally, Yawn got initially created as an NPM clone because we needed it to be entirely compatible with the ecosystem, including the CLI commands. As such, we inherited various behaviors that don't mesh very well with the user experience that we want to provide in Yawn. And that's something that, as I mentioned, we really care about. So for those technical reasons, we wanted to build a new modern foundation that would be more suited to what we had in mind for today's development. But that's not the only reason. There's another one, and maybe the main one. We wanted to give more power to the community. We wanted to make it easier for you to contribute to Yawn. We wanted you to be able to write your own feature without having to wait for us to release it in the next release. After all, we don't want to work for you. We want to work with you. So our architecture needed to reflect that, and for this reason, we decided to make it very modular so that you would be able to write your own plugin to extend Yawn. In the same vein, we moved our code base to a more familiar stack, TypeScript. We hope that it will decrease the time needed for you to understand all the pieces in Yawn and how they fit together, which means that you would be able to help us maintain this critical part of your infrastructure that is Yawn. Now, we've talked about, that was the abstract part of the talk, and now we're going to discuss a bit what is actually concretely coming into Yawn 2. One thing is improved logging. So you might see on the screen that there are more colors than there were before. So we are going to make sure that we make color in every places that needs to be understood by the user and that can change from one run to another. Additionally, all messages, actually, not only error message, but also information or warnings, now have an error code that indicates which type of error it is. We took this ID from TypeScript, and it's actually very handy because it means that you can just search on Google for the error code, and you will get more information, more details about what's the problem and how to fix it, meaning that you will be able to unblock yourself much more easily. We wanted, through those two changes, give you the key to understand the tool that you're using every day. Another feature that we are going to add to Yawn 2 is Yawn TLX. This feature was long overdue. You might know Yawn Create, which allows you to install in your global package list a package prefixed by create and then run it locally. We are expanding this scope so that it becomes possible to run any program. Yawn TLX, similar to its sibling npx, can install packages from the registry without mutating your local project. It allows you to run your one-off scripts without having to worry about reverting your changes. So for example, here we have a classic project with a Webpack configuration. We would want to minify this script. Before, we would need to run yawn add terser, which is a minifier, then run terser, then run yawn remove to remove terser. Now, with DLX, we just have to run yawn DLX terser index.js, and Yawn will automatically fetch all the dependencies and run the program. Additionally, since Yawn is now using plug and play by default, it means also that we don't even have to create non-modules anymore. That makes TLX even faster during the second calls, because then we don't need to fetch the package from the NPM registry, and you don't even need to copy the files around. So the next time you call TLX, it will be just as fast as it should. Another feature that we are going to add is Yawn Hub. And more than one feature, it's actually more of a philosophy that we want to make it much easier to work with workspaces. Yawn Hub allows you to upgrade your dependencies across all your workspaces at once, meaning that if you run yawn up Lodash, the Lodash dependency will be upgraded in all your workspaces without you having to do anything. What's more, it has an interactive mode. And now you might wonder, what is the interactive mode? Well, that's also something new in Yawn 2. We are adding much more tools, allowing you to control what happens when you run a command by letting Yawn ask you questions. So with the -i -- interactive option, Yawn will sometimes stop and ask you to choose the right option amongst multiple ones. One example, for example, is when you run Yawn add. With the interactive mode, Yawn will ask you which version of the package you want to add in your dependencies. And not only about multiple same version, but it might also ask you whether you want to use the same version as the one already used by a different package in your workspaces, which means that you don't have to try to figure out whether your workspace are already using a package before adding it into another one. Constraints are a new feature coming with V2, and that's a very big one. The concept is, what if we had an ESLint that was able to validate the package.json? Under which rule would it work? And we don't want to write too much code, so how do we do this? That's constraints. Constraints are written in Prolog. That might be surprising, but declarative language are uniquely suited for this kind of task. And they allow you to write the rules that all your workspaces must validate. And what's more, they are auto-fixable. So if one of your workspaces doesn't match the rule that you defined, they can be auto-fixed by Yawn itself. So let's see a small example of what it is. I have a project with two workspaces, my front end and my back end. Both of them depend on Lodash, but they depend on different versions of Lodash. So it's not great. Additionally, those two projects are actually TypeScript, and so they should depend on tslib. But I forgot to add the dependency. So how could Yawn help us in this situation? We have the new command Yawn constraints check. When Yawn constraints check run, Yawn will validate that all your workspaces validate with the rules that you define. So in my case, I defined two different rules. Then later, as you can see, it has been able to detect that Lodash is depended upon by two different versions, and to tell us that we don't depend on tslib. With the command Yawn constraints fix, we can see that Yawn is able to auto-fix most of the errors. So in this case, it is able to say, you should depend on tslib, but you don't. I will add it. It's not possible in every case. So for example, in this case, it cannot fix the Lodash dependency, the Lodash conflict, because it's ambiguous. It doesn't know whether it should use one or the other without more information. In order to fix it manually, we can just use the Yawn add command, possibly with the -i flag, interactive flag, which will allow us to reuse the versions of Lodash that are... Sorry, my GIF is not exactly aligned with my words. So that's a bit annoying. Yeah. So here you can see that we run Yawn add Lodash, and we specify the interactive mode. Yawn is then able to tell us that we have already multiple versions of Lodash in our project, so do we want to reuse one of them? And we can choose which option we want to use, and Yawn will then apply the change to the project. So in this case, we want to reuse the same one as the front end. Everything got installed immediately without fetching anything on the npm registry. Then, if we run Yawn constraints check again, we can see that everything got fixed and we don't have errors anymore. Constraints are even more powerful in that they are actually a query, a fact database. You can ask the constraint engine to tell you all about your project. So in this case, with the Yawn constraints query command, you can just ask Yawn to tell us what are all the dependencies for all the workspaces in my project and what type are there. Or you can go a bit more limited and just ask Yawn to tell you all about all the versions of Lodash that are in your project. You can, thanks to Prolog power, you can actually combine those capabilities together and get even more information about the project that you use locally. Zero installs are something that come with V2, and that might be the most important feature that we are adding. Zero install are more a concept actually than a feature. They are aimed for applications and not so much for libraries, even though they still work. And the concept is that you should never have to run yarn install again. You should only have to run yarn add when you add a dependency or yarn remove when you remove a dependency from one of your projects, but you should never have to run yarn install, not locally, not in development, not in production, never. So in order to do this, all you need to do is to add all your yarn-generated files into your repository. So this way, you don't need to run yarn install because everything is already inside the repository, right? So now I know what most of you might think. Committing the non-modules directory is bad. And that's a good thing that we actually created plug and play not so long ago so that you wouldn't have a non-modules directory anymore, right? It's like pieces are fitting together. So it's different with the zero install because instead of having a gigantic non-modules that contain 10,000 files, literally, we only have one folder, one flat folder that contains exactly one archive for each package that you use, which is actually great because then you get a quick overview of which package is used by your project. And during code reviews, you have a much better sense of how much adding a package will add to your project. So the advantages of zero install are numerous. In particular, it provides for a much better developer experience. By using zero install, you don't have to run yarn install anymore, which means that when you change from a branch to another in your repository, you don't need to run yarn install. You don't have your application is crashing because you forget to update your dependencies and you merge something from one of your colleagues. Additionally, the deployments are faster, simpler, and more stable because, again, you don't need to run yarn install anymore. And that's something I learned at Facebook, which is that as much as we try to make things work out of the box, we always have environmental issues that make programs crash. Sometimes it's a file system that will go read-only for no reason. Sometimes it's something else. So the only chance you have for a program not to crash is not to call it anymore. So by removing the need to call yarn on your production server, on your CI, we remove one of the main factors for which your project might not deploy correctly. So for example, this is what zero install looks in practice. I have my package.json, and if I require Webpack, I get the version 3.12. And now let's say that I want to upgrade to version 4. So I create a new branch, and I run yarn add with Webpack 4, which adds all the dependencies within my repository, and everything is done. So now if I make a git status, we will see that, so first we check that the version got updated, and we know are using the version 4. And now we are going to make a git status, and we can see that a bunch of zip archives appeared in the repository. We just add all those zip archives to our commits, and starting from there, everything is good. Anyone checking this branch will be able to use Webpack 4 without having to run yarn install. In fact, let's say that we have someone from our sellers that come to us and say that there is a critical bug and we need to fix it right now and on master. So we go back to our Webpack 3 branch, and we don't have to run yarn install again because everything is already in the repository. So we make our change, and we get Webpack 3, everything works. And once we are done, we just switch back to Webpack 4, and everything is again using the Webpack 4. And the great thing with all this is that you never had to think twice about which other command you use other than git, and everything works out of the box. In this case, I can just make a merge from one branch to another, and again, no yarn install, it just works. Now we are going to do something a bit more complex. We are actually going to clone the yarn repository and see how it works. So the yarn repository uses zero install. So all of our dependencies are checked in within the repository. So once we finished cloning the repository, everything is actually already on the disk, and we don't need to, again, run yarn install, which is good. As you can see, it's a bit slower to clone the repository, but one thing to keep in mind is that it's still much faster to clone it than to clone it and then run yarn install. So there is a trade-off. So as you can see, we downloaded and cloned Yawn, and now I can start running any command I could think of without having to worry about whether my dependencies have been correctly installed. And it's the same thing when you work with remote contributors, because if they have their own branch with their own features, you can just switch from one to the other without having to worry about the context switching. So let's recap a bit. We have improved logging, improved workspace features, Yawn TLX, zeroinstyle, package constraints, and that's just a small overview of all the features that we are adding to Yawn 2. This talk is only 30 minutes, and I couldn't talk about everything, but we are constantly revamping the CLI interface so that the workflow becomes much easier to use. We have a changelog that lists a bit more all the changes that we are making. So as you can see, I have put the bit.ly link here, and you can check it yourself later. And we are looking for contributors. So as I mentioned, Yawn is an open source project. And at the moment, there are no companies that are owning it. Not Facebook, not Google, not Expo, no one. And we really want to give more power to the community. And as such, it's a very good time to start ramping in the project and taking responsibilities on a project that is used by a lot of persons. So if you want to check how things are done in Yawn, just pop into our Discord server, ping us, and we will be happy to help you figure out what you could do. Thank you for your attention.